Yep. Should we just introduce ourselves? Yeah. Hi there, good afternoon. Sorry for interrupting your conversations. Hope everybody's awake. What we're going to talk about today is preparing for quantum. My name is Jaya Ballou. I am the Chief Information Security Officer over at Rapid7.
And I'm Donna Dodson. I'm a security consultant at Evolution Q, and we really appreciate all of you taking the time. We were looking at all the panels at 1:15, so we're really glad that you selected this one.
It's the best one. Shh. So, so let's get us started. We have to do the standard RSA disclaimer.
And in this presentation, we're going to go over and talk a little bit about the quantum threat. But really what we're here to talk about is ways that you can think about to use, to build a quantum safe program and to help you get started to providing a framework around a resilient cryptographic platform and what that means. As part of this, we'll take a look at the standards and the policies and the practices that are available to you today and provide a path to get you started. So this really is meant to be something that's practical and that you can take back and use within your organization, all based on kind of a risk management approach.
Mm-hmm. So really what we want to do is help you understand, first of all, what do you need to worry about, and incredibly practically, how do you demystify this for your organization to get started? Let's zoom out for 1 second and talk about, why worry in the first place. So I'm just a raise of hands. So everybody's heard about the quantum computing threat? Yeah, well done. Is there anyone who's like, what's that? Awesome sauce. But let's talk about this, okay? There's a couple of things here. So we know that there's a concern that quantum computers are going to break our current algorithms, the asymmetric ones that we use across the span of the internet. But there's still a concern that even if we don't have to wait until there's a quantum computer, that we still have this capture now, decrypt later problem. Everybody familiar with the capture now, decrypt later? Anyone not familiar? Oh, you're not familiar? Okay, so what that basically means is that assume that you can capture a whole bunch of internet traffic, including the traffic that's encrypted, yeah? And what they do is they hold on to that captured traffic, waiting for a viable quantum computer that's actually capable of using Shor's algorithm to break that encrypted material to turn it into plain text. So it's capture now and decrypt later. And the reasoning behind that is that sometimes old secrets are just as good as new secrets because of their predictive capabilities. Yeah? Okay, cool.
Now, as we look at this slide, how many people were listening to the cryptographers panel earlier today? So I think many of us heard Adi Shamir saying, we don't have anything to worry about for 50 years, maybe even longer. At least that's what I got out of it. I was sitting at a spot where it was a little more difficult to hear, but is that pretty much what everybody else heard? Yeah? Yeah. So as we think about the quantum threat, and we think about how quantum computing has changed over the years, I don't think that Jay and I are standing up here to tell you that quantum computers are going to be cryptographically relevant at and name a date. That's not what our goal here for you is today. I will say that I have been in this space for decades. I used to be head of the program, the NIST cybersecurity program, and started looking at the quantum computing space back in the early 2000s. And as I've looked at the advances that they've made in the physics problem, I see that we've changed from if quantum computers could be built at all, and everything was a paper-based exercise, and there was very little work actually being done, to more of an engineering problem that we have today. And I think as I look at those changes that I personally have seen, I have seen a lot of advancement. Can I say that it's going to happen at this date or this date or this date? I'm not able to do that. And that's not my role here today in what I'm attempting to do.
Yeah, and just to add to that, for the last couple of years, have been helping run the European Quantum Flagship, which is a €1 billion flagship out of the European Commission to basically do quantum computing, sensors and metrology, quantum communication, including setting up a quantum internet, both terrestrially and with the European Space Agency in space, and quantum simulation. And with all of these things, with all of these advancements, you have quantum skeptics. You also have quantum optimists. And I think that we need to kind of balance this between the skeptics and the optimists and still have, as Donna pointed out, a risk-based approach to our plan. So don't side with either, polar opposite, but really think what makes sense for you, your organization, your data, and then let's do that. No matter what, we need to get started because the clock is ticking one way or the other, and I'd rather prioritize things that are important before they become urgent. Yep.
So, as we think about the tools for quantum safety, I think this is many of the things that you heard about in the panel earlier today for those of you who listened to the cryptographers panel, but symmetric keys and symmetric key cryptography, we need longer key sizes. That's not so hard. Public keys, we need to replace currently used algorithms. That's a big deal. Key management, looking at our public key infrastructure and making changes there. This doesn't get as much attention in conversations. From where I stand, I think this is really a big deal and a much harder challenge sometimes than we think about. We've seen some interest in quantum key distribution in different parts of the world, and we've seen some interest in quantum random number devices to help us create stronger keys. So it leads Jay and I to think a little bit about, is there a combination of classical and quantum key management that can help our cryptographic platform so that it is more resilient, regardless of whether we have a risk of quantum or not? And as we're looking at this space, and we're looking at building a more resilient cryptographic platform from the quantum standpoint, do we really want to look at resiliency and how we can build a stronger platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really this idea, this notionality of, if we say that we already are going to do hybrid things from the post-quantum algorithmic perspective, I think defense in depth means like that we actually assume that things will always fail and that we will always have, at the very minimum, a backup plan. So even if we don't implement it all at once, let's make sure that we have those plans available, ready, and roll-outable. Yeah, so let's be honest. Every single business on Earth needs this notion of cryptographic agility. So this notion of resilience, this notion of how do we build something that can take a hit, but will still remain ticking and viable for us as an entity. And this is just a random, public use image of a corporation. So you have your on-prem network, you have multiple cloud providers, you have partners and employees that are working remotely, and there's a whole slew of cryptographic protocols in here. I would like to ask, and you don't have to reveal who you are, but is there anyone in this room that actually has an understanding within your own enterprise of your own landscape of cryptographic algorithms in current use in your company and that of your extended vendor landscape? Okay, dude, we have to talk because I'd like to understand how you've done that and when you started this journey and what you've learned from it. Because I have to say that from talking to a lot of folks in a couple of different continents, there is no one who's raised up their hand like this gentleman who has this knowledge, who's already done the vendor questionnaire to figure out that extended cryptographic usage landscape. Yeah.
This is a problem within your organization, but it's also a challenge within your community. And when I talk about in your community, I'm meaning with your suppliers and within your infrastructure, within how you connect to all the different ways you connect to the internet, how your folks interact, the kinds of devices that they use. It's amazing when you really start digging all the places that you're relying on cryptography. Not all of those places and spaces are you relying on cryptography to protect information that needs to be secure for 10, 20, 50 years, 100 years, as we heard earlier today. But just thinking about that cryptographic platform and having a resilient cryptographic platform, it feels sometimes a little bit daunting once you start to do that look within your organization.
And if it was just our organization, it might still feel like a task that is accomplishable. The problem is, again, we're reliant on so many different vendors in the hardware, software, and systems lifecycle that that's actually where that emergent behavior and the system's complexity begins. And it's these things that I find much more difficult to inventorize, because we still do have concerns about, data in motion, data in rest, the same old, the confidentiality, integrity, availability triad. All of those things are still persistent. It's just that we have an incomplete knowledge to all of that current use. So if you just say, hey, look, I only am responsible for that uplink to my cloud provider and they worry about the rest, I fear that that is insufficient to actually support the cloud resources you may be using. So this is why we need a more thorough examination of our businesses from this cryptographic agility perspective. And we need to assume from the get-go that stuff will break and that we have that backup plan ready, not only for ourselves, but for that extended landscape.
So, as we were thinking, what do we need to create this cryptographic platform? What does that word mean? What should we be thinking about? Well, from the information security community, we need the algorithms. Certainly, the cryptographic community and NIST have come together to create some potential algorithms that will end up in standards. So we've done some work in that piece. But even after we have those standards, we need to have test and conformity and assessments and validations. Why do we need that? Sometimes it's hard to get cryptography right, and we've talked about putting it in so many places and spaces that you really want to know that you're conformant to the actual specifications that have been laid out so that you can have more confidence in both security and interoperability of your cryptographic platform. You have the protocols that need to be updated to take advantage of these new algorithms and these new standards.
Yeah, and again, this is that complex ecosystem that we were talking about, that you need not just a couple of standards to be in place, but you need to have support, and you need to also know from your vendors that they have their own infrastructure ready, and they've done their own underlying supply chain management for software and hardware and other managed service products that they may be using. Should I go to the next slide? Yep.
So a lot of times, when we come to a conference like this, we hear a lot about the advances in technology and the importance of those advances, and we talk about standards, and we hear a lot about the algorithms. But not always do we think about some of the other pieces that need to be in place in order to really build that kind of infrastructure. And I think we need a workforce that's prepared to help us with this. And that workforce is changing. As we think about quantum, not only do we need the right mathematicians, but I think we're going to need more physicists. We don't think about that quite as often, and I can remember a time when we didn't think as much about having cryptographers on staff within our IT workforce as well. And then to work with the mathematicians and the physicists, we need the engineers to develop and maintain the products, services, and infrastructure that we are building. As we think about the mathematicians and the physicists, I've also noticed over the years that very often they speak different languages. We've had this problem before in the cybersecurity space where cybersecurity people were really good at talking to cybersecurity people. But when they got out of that cybersecurity space and they had to talk with managers and other parts of the organization, it was a struggle. And sometimes I can see, even today, that it can be a struggle to get the different groups talking to each other, and particularly around security issues and how you can build out these kinds of capabilities. So we don't think as much about that workforce piece, but it is changing and the needs are changing.
Yeah, if I can add, Donna's being incredibly kind and politically diplomatic, but honestly...
Okay, so I worked for the government for a long time.
Yeah, so to be really honest, it's actually... The lack of cooperation is a real concern. I was going to use the word shit show, but that doesn't seem so friendly. Yes, I was going to use that. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that because it's competition for scarce resources, funding for programs, you see that there is a greater degree of antipathy between groups of cryptographers and physicists for that funding. And why? Because the arguments are made that if you have a new algorithmic transition, that it isn't really NP hard, and that the only provable, truly viable solution is to have a quantum key distributed network, which will actually solve the problem for a longer term without worrying about any cryptographic mathematical weaknesses. And on the converse, there is a concern about a certain degree of snake oil salesmanship from the QKD vendors, right? From the quantum random generator vendors. So that there is this antipathy, and it is palpable. The problem is that for the majority of companies, this is significantly problematic because you have two groups of experts who violently disagree with each other, and people in companies, they need to make a choice. And they don't know who to believe. So this is why it's so important to move to policies. Do you want to take this?
Sure. So these policies need to work to build that agile cryptographic platform. That resiliency piece, I believe we've been lucky to date with our cryptographic platform where we haven't had any catastrophic breaks all at one time where we need to make changes. I think some of what we've seen as the cryptographic community has tried to come together to look at PQC and some of the algorithms that have been winning down, and we've narrowed it down from to 8 and the selection down to the final 4. We saw some pretty severe breaks happen at the very end game. Right? So there's a lot of pieces here that haven't been studied as much or as long as some of the more traditional algorithms. And as we think about that, and we think about how we rely on cryptography as one of the foundational elements for all of our cybersecurity programs, we get back to that need for a cryptographic platform that has that kind of resiliency, where you have the ability to have more than one algorithm in place, perhaps, that you can swap in and change, that you have multiple, perhaps, key management approaches, if that's appropriate for the kind of data that you are protecting using using cryptography. So you have to look at all of this and think about it as you're building your cryptographic platform. And these policies will help you as you're building out that platform to think about what's important for your organization. And it will encourage both the math and the physics folks to create together those strong primitives to get to where we want to be for tomorrow and beyond. And there's always the question of funding, because this kind of change will not be inexpensive. So no one's saying, well, build this great resilient cryptographic platform and it's going to be free. But if it's well planned and well thought out and well understood, it's certainly going to be cheaper than running in at the last minute trying to change that entire use of cryptography within your organization.
Yep. So let's take a look at where we are today.
Standards. So we've already talked about this. NIST and the cryptographic community have worked to identify 4 algorithms for standardization. They are looking at perhaps adding some algorithms to that standardization process so that they have some different kinds of capabilities in play. Again, they're looking at that question of resiliency in the algorithm schemes that they pull together. These standards are foundational, but not sufficient as you're thinking about that platform. Not just the standards, but you have to upgrade the protocols, because these new algorithms are not drop-in replacements like we've seen when we saw some of the changes from things like DES to AES or SHA to SHA-1 or SHA-2. Some of the public key algorithms have been much closer to drop-in replacement than we've seen with these. So you're going to see some changes as you look at some of these new algorithms. The IETF is doing a tremendous amount of work on how to look at this from the short term and the long term, how to change some of the PKI standards as an example, how to look at a hybrid approach with some of the algorithms we have today, how to use some of the new PQC algorithms.
Yeah, so as a member of ETSI PQC, I can tell you that what we do is we follow the work of NIST very closely, but we don't hold ourselves only to that. We also look at all of the developments happening globally. So we have, like a sort of around the world session where we can see what's happening not only with PQC, but also with QKD deployments and secure communications networks, even in China, for example. So we really want to understand what are the deployments and the additional work that's being done everywhere else. And ETSI has a sort of wider net that they can cast to look at that from a more global perspective, as does ANSI, ISO, etc.
So as we're building this out, we have to think about testing. We're not going to have testing for these algorithms until the standards come out, and the standards have to go through a process. NIST has to put out the drafts, and then the drafts have to go through review before the FIPS 140 kinds of tests come out. Those are often used as support for common criteria. So it's going to take a while before some of the products, you can go back to your vendors and say, well, has this been validated? Has it actually met some of the standards, and that you've been tested and that you have conformity assessment there? But I think it's a good time to start asking vendors for some of that. But that's a more of a formal testing process. More needs to be done than just that formal kind of conformity assessment.
Yeah, and really what we're looking for when we have, more needed is just a more joined up approach between folks that are actually conducting testing. And, I love this philosophy that came out of Google, of Google's blameless postmortem, which they conduct on a regular basis. I think we need to kind of embrace these kinds of philosophies as a community. We used to be so good at sharing our failures. I feel like that's actually kind of dripped behind in the areas where it's actually the most important. So having a better joined up approach, identifying and sharing the workload and doing more post-mortem sharing, especially when we fail, is super important to that less formalized testing structure. And what I really want to add, because there's so many concerns when you look at this globally, especially from a European perspective as well, around concerns for sovereignty. If there is a break in a particular algorithm or a particular technique, there are concerns, but I don't understand why we would use sovereignty as an excuse not to have a joined up approach towards testing and sharing of failures here. Because fundamentally, if we just isolate ourselves, even from a sort of transatlantic perspective, I think it would be killing, because these will be the first adoption countries.
So we need more additional collaborations and prototyping of some of these capabilities where one organization gets together with another organization so that we can have the security and the interoperability that we expect from cryptography. And we need to be able to share the results of that, both the successes and the failures. So this is an interesting slide. When Jay and I were first asked to do this panel by RSA, we saw we were asked to do something on preparing to be quantum ready. Now, what is the term quantum ready and what does it mean?
Yep.
And we ask ourselves, what does it really mean to be quantum ready? And we hear that term often, but it probably means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And today, I think there's a lot of thought on implementing the post-quantum algorithms into an organization's security posture, and that makes you quantum ready. Does that make you quantum ready?
I was thinking we could actually do a Vox Populi. We've got you. You're in this room.
Okay.
You're a captive audience. So how many of you people think that if you just implement the new NIST algorithms, that you're quantum ready? All right, we gave you a cheat sheet. We never should have let you see the rest of the slides.
Yeah.
And the second thing, how many people think that developing a strategy to address the risk, because you're now kind of dealing with the vulnerabilities posed by weakened encryption, that's a quantum-ready approach? Really? So all of you, please raise your hands, because I really want to verify. All of you think that the ability to effectively protect your data using cryptographic services, where you have both classical and quantum computers, that's quantum-ready. Is that correct?
Maybe they have another definition
What's
that's
the other?
even better.
Anything that falls out of this, indeed. Sorry? All three. Have to be all three. Yeah. I think the third one assumes kind of all the two that preceded it, but okay. Yeah, it has to be all three. And maybe in succession of one another. I'll go for that. Yeah, okay, that's pretty neat.
I think the point of this slide is very often as we think about preparing for the world of quantum, we forget that what we do also has to be resistant against attacks from classical computers and a classical infrastructure. And sometimes we forget about that and we start thinking only about the quantum. And imagine a world where we have both quantum and classical computers together. And I think that's where sometimes people's focus goes all the way this direction or all the way that direction. And we don't imagine a world with both classical and quantum computers. And I think that piece is really important.
Yeah. So, I do have to say something, because very often when we talk about quantum, There's also organizations that have a quantum risk appetite that they're already defining without actually getting a whole bunch of other stuff done well. And Wendy Nather from Cisco likes to talk about the information security poverty line and the fact that a lot of organizations can't even get the basics right and don't have the funding and don't have the support. I think that we really need to pay attention to that problem before we only try to address the quantum stuff. So no matter what else you do, we should all agree, of course, we want to do a quantum readiness journey, but we need to start before the quantum stuff actually starts with the basics. So we understand ourself. Know thyself is still the most difficult thing for any organization to do in terms of asset understanding, employee use of data, et cetera, the extended vendor landscape, still super, super difficult. So starting there is really where everything should begin. And then fundamentally, if we understood ourselves, then we can really have some programs that address where the areas of concern are and what we need to do about that. And then finally, really, again, it's not about quantum readiness as an isolated thing. It's about understanding, what does our data need? What is our company like? Really understanding those crown jewels and that deeper understanding of threat, that's what we need to be able to do.
So once you have that real understanding of your data and how your data is being used and the life cycle of that data and the protections that it needs, then you can start on a quantum risk assessment for your organization and understanding the effects of quantum computing on your information assets, on your data, on your infrastructure, and understanding the concerns around capture now, decrypt later, understanding what services cryptography provides in your existing infrastructure and who's providing it, getting back to your
Supply chain. Yep. And then, by the way, a great place to start. How many of you use Git? All right. Well, check your Git repo. Look for all your crypto libraries. That's an easy search on Git. Okay, just start with your own Git. And then we can look at our downstream and upstream effect from other vendors. So that's an easy one to do, and then to figure out, that the rest of that supply chain. And by the way, if there's a couple of photos you would want to take of any of the slides here, I'd say this one. Okay, so we wrote it down really simply, but if you want to get started tomorrow, start answering these questions and make sure you've documented them well. But these are the things that I'd like to see, viral on Twitter, I suppose. That's not going to happen, but this is what people need to do.
And because these algorithms are a little bit different, the PQC algorithms, really understanding your performance requirements ends up being a particularly big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, we need also follow through. So it's about starting with answering those questions, but it's great when we do that as specialists, as technical and operational folk within our entities, but getting money to actually do this through executive awareness, leadership, budget, subsequent activities, making sure that you can test, fail, reprototype, and build use cases that are relevant to you, that's the hard stuff. So the follow through is way harder, even than the initial difficult area. And then if we do those things well, then we can actually start experimenting. So, yeah, if I could just add. Yeah, so another slide that I would like you to take a photo of is around vendors. All right, which questions do you want to have in a vendor questionnaire that you would send out and then actually get answered? Please copy this slide too. You can, expand as necessary, but if you have a supplier security annex for privacy and security, and you say what you expect of your vendors on all new contracts or any contracts that are up for renegotiation, I would love to see these questions answered by everyone, because we have this chicken and egg dilemma of who starts first. Do you start first, or does the vendor start first? When I talk to other vendors, they say, that whole quantum thing, there's not a single customer that asks us anything about it. So ask your vendors. Ask your vendors, because then they'll do something. We need that network effect in order to be ready on time for everyone. So it's about paying it forward by making sure we have legal and procurement engaged, getting our TPRM strategy right, mailing these questionnaire questions around about what do they use, what's their roadmap for readiness, what's their migration plan, when are they going to communicate to the rest of us, and by the way, can we audit your stuff? Okay, so I really think that this belongs in every annex, and this is a really easy template to kind of get the discussion rolling.
So we thought about what a roadmap to readiness might look like, and certainly this is more aggressive probably than any of us will be, but sometimes if you're not aggressive in your thinking, time has a way of creeping in and lapsing up. So, thinking now about raising that awareness and having that preparation phase.
Yeah, so, Biden in the United States signed the Cybersecurity of Quantum Preparedness Act. I guess
Yep.
that was last year. And I think that the target date to have the initial assessment done by the OMB was like in May of this year. So if you work for the federal government, this is not that crazy at all, right? So you're just trying to figure out where am I at in terms of awareness creation and your preparation in 2023. That's not so nuts. And then you're going to do the proactive discovery and engagement in 2024. That's also when NIST is expected to release its standards. And then in 2025, you can actually start that transition because, again, in that act, it mandates a 1-year transition time from the time that NIST releases. Okay? So this is ambitious for the majority of organizations, but if you're part of the federal government, this shouldn't be that weird at all. So by 2025, you're going to have your stuff done, and all we are encouraging you to do is to get started early so you can test again, share results, hear about fails from other people, and then even when you think you're good to go, it's a nice place to be from an information security perspective to get your ass handed back to you again and again, because it's the only way you get stronger. So make sure you have backup and monitoring in place, and that you have both vendor as well as crypto agility. So you can swap vendors, and the vendors won't like this, but you need to have a backup plan that is ready to go because there will be implementation failures. There will be side channel attacks. There will be scenarios that we hadn't thought of yet that will definitely emerge from these phenomena, and we need to be in a place where we can monitor for those threats and evaluate them appropriately. Anything to add? No? Okay. Okay.
And there are some great places where you can get started just taking a look and tools that are publicly available that you can look at. We're not endorsing these by
Yeah,
any
buyer
means.
beware, caveat emptor. But like, I did a couple of searches. So OpenSSH has native post-quantum algorithmic support by the get-go. Open Quantum Safe helps with standards. It's really neat. You probably can't read this from the slide, but that's a command line for turning on quantum protocols on the Mullvad VPN. And it's using WireGuard as the underlying VPN protocol, which is in all Linux distros. There's just a bunch of really cool solutions that you can already start playing. And play is the operative word here, playing with now. I'm not saying put into production. I'm not saying go out there and buy anything, but you can start playing. You can see what it does and what it doesn't do. And those performance requirements that we're talking about, super important to get a sense of what yours are. Okay? Any questions about this? No? Right. Okay.
So we talked a lot about some of the challenges in the quantum space. And Jay and I have seen a lot of different public debates around quantum. And we feel that it's important to mention that for you and your organization and your risk management posture, you need to evaluate some of the threats. And some of the threats are really taking a moment to take a look at some of the social media that comes out around quantum computing and take a look at it and make decisions for your organization about what's FUD and what's real.
Yeah, and what happens too, I had a quite senior security person from a customer of ours share with me the information that crystals in Kyber were broken. And I was like, are you sure you're not referring to something you read about Psych? No, it was crystals in Kyber. So then I asked, like, where's the source of this? And it was this lower right-hand article about AI power analysis breaks post-quantum security. It did not break It was a side channel attack. It could have been relevant for anything. It was not specific to crystals and Kyber. But this is the problem with the misinterpretation that's then there and then gets propagated. So we really need to be in a better position to evaluate threats. That doesn't mean hot takes. It means working with communities, finding friends, and sharing information about those failures. Yeah.
And so, as you get started, as you're here today, you're getting started on that journey. You've already made that commitment. And it really is, as Jaya said, that process of iteration and improvement. You need that organizational and executive leadership. And that's not always quickly available, but you've got to get that buy-in from within your organization as you start this. And you need that wider community support as you're building these tests, as you're working with others. Some places that you might be able to get this, maybe an ISAC, maybe a CERT going forward. Maybe there's another path. NIST is doing some work. I know some NIST folks are in the audience. They're doing some work on how to think about quantum preparedness. So really, what we wanted to leave you with is a call to action.
Yeah. We want you to get your hands dirty. Get them really messy. You should be grossed out by your own efforts. And then we want you to talk about it to everybody else. Okay, so we want you to get in there and get it going. And in order, by the way, I found that in most organizations, no argument for funding ever comes better than, hey, but our competitors are doing it. So, like, finding your friends may also mean finding unusual bedfellows in your competitors. And that's why we left you with 2 reports that were brought out. We worked on those from the World Economic Forum. One is around the state of quantum computing. So you can give that to your board members so they understand, like, what's the real stuff, what's the hype, what's the FUD. And then another one is about, hey, again, how do we transition? And this is a bit more high level, but how do we transition to a post-quantum economy? What does that mean? You know, like a quantum safe economy. So it means that we have this global ecosystem of all of these people getting their hands dirty. And we need your help to do that. So I really would like this to be your call to action to go out there, and we try to make it as simple and pragmatic and digestible and easy as possible to just get started.
So, applying what you've learned today, next week, reviewing your network, doing those basics, understanding where your data is processed and stored, ensuring that you understand the role of your vendors that support your data and your communications infrastructure. So this is really the basics, and probably most of the people in this room can do this already. And so you're already a week ahead on your quantum journey. Map your data security needs from a life cycle perspective. So what you're doing with your data, how you're protecting it, how long you need to protect it, et cetera.
And that means that after this, like in the first 3 months, you're going to have your, bunch of folks who you're going to work with to get this done, whether that's inside the company or outside of it, and you're going to start with even an initial quantum risk assessment. And that means eventually you're going to do your utmost to get that management buy-in, find a way to fund and further your quantum safe migration. Well, I think Donna and I both wish you the best of luck in this journey. And remember, it is about the journey, not always about the destination, but we still want you to be in a place together with us where we're all quantum safe.
That's right.
And if there are any questions?
We have a few minutes, I think, left for...
We got a 5?
We have 5 minutes for questions.
I've been dying to ask a question. I don't know if this is on. Okay. Well, thank you so much for this. This is really informative. One of the companies that I have is a quantum software company. And I have a stake in that, and our CEO, founder, has set up offices in the Netherlands. We're working with EU and ESA and so on, so this was great. I would say we are already running our software, not crypto, but our actual solution software on classical and quantum hardware, so we're already in a hybrid environment and will be for a while. And I think what you're talking about now about getting everyone invested, I think people need to not think about it as a quantum problem, but as a security problem, and talk about it as protecting your ROI, because what board and C-suite doesn't want to look at threats to the overall ROI? And so that might be some suggestion. But I did have a couple of questions. One is, will the standards and because I'm not so focused on the cryptography side yet, but your call to action has made me want to play with it. We're more like playing with the hardware with our algorithms. But will the standards or the algorithms themselves have any kind of impact on either the hardware or companies like ours developing software, or are the crypto algorithms more or less agnostic? You know, will there be any kind of like, oh, now in order to implement this particular security algorithm, we'll need a special box because companies are going to want to make proprietary developments in these. Like, will there be that? And then, you know, like, what does that look like? And then the second question is, are you guys going to be at the World Quantum Congress in September in DC? Thank you.
We can both take. Shall I? Yeah. So, look, I think part of your question, will it be free or will it be? There are efforts to make everything around here open source. There are companies. One example is Cloudflare, who've pledged that everything that we do around quantum will always be open source. But I think it's difficult to predict these things because it is a lift for a lot of vendor organizations. So the question is, will you actually have to pay for an additional degree of security before something is self-evident and it should be naturally baked into the process, right? So.
I think my question was not so much, I mean, I'm expecting we're going to have to pay because there's going to have to be a market. But
Right.
the question is, are the things that they're going to develop necessitate developments in hardware and software?
Absolutely. So let's be clear. Adoption of a certain algorithm doesn't mean that you're done then. You know, it's an entire ecosystem lift and shift when we do this. And it is absolutely hardware and software and, you know, everything fungible, like services in between. So I think it's quite a dramatic shift. Did you want to add?
Yeah. I think that the algorithms, the standards themselves will be publicly available, so they'll be implementable by lots of organizations. Having said that, in order to get the performance requirements, you may, and probably I could imagine, see some requirements in hardware to get perhaps some of the speed for certain applications that you're looking for, or some of the performance requirements may necessitate some changes in software, et cetera. So it's those kinds of performance requirements that you may see some changes necessitating inside the infrastructure.
And are you going to the conference?
I was not planning on going to the Congress.
Somebody from Evolution Q will be there.
Any other questions? Yes, I think so, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they will be available. Yes, of course. Just take pictures. You can always contact us. I think
Yeah.
we're always available for questions. And again, we try to make this as simple as possible just to get started. We're trying to make the threshold low. Thank you so
very
much.
for your time.
Yeah.